Hey, thanks for watching our videos. I hope you're enjoying the last video on the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Today, we want to piggyback on that one and continue that discussion. So today, what we want to talk about is why did the Mountain Meadows Massacre happen? What precipitated this thing to happen the way it did? So there's a couple of things. So we're going to start kind of high level and then zero in on this massacre to understand it better. So a couple of things we need to think about is the culture of the 1850s. So the Mountain Meadows Massacre happened September 11th, 1857. So it technically started, the first raid, Plan A started September 7th, but Plan B was able to be finished on September 11th. That's the actual massacre when everybody died. 1850s is an interesting time of American history to look at. We've got the Mexican-American Wars. We've got a lot of immigration happening. So Indians being pushed out all over the Western United States. A lot of challenges are happening. Growth in the country. We're getting, if you think about it, this is just a few years before the Civil War happened. So there's still some division. There's still some anger and resentments and challenges that happen. If you want to read a good book to talk about some of these ideas, this is a really good one. The Turbulent Era. This is it's a thin one, not too big at all to read, but this gentleman here, Michael Feldberg, talks about what was it like in Jacksonian America under President Jackson. So the times were crazy. Back then, they didn't have a standing army like we have today. It was more of volunteers for the army and people we could recruit to pull together to make an army. We didn't have standing police departments, especially in the Western United States, like we have today. So the idea of frontier justice was a thing. If you felt somebody slighted you or did something, if you waited for a judge to come around to deal with them, to put them into court, to try them, it could be many years before that ever happened. In the meantime, they're going free and you are disadvantaged. So it was common for people to form a militia themselves and to exact their own justice on people. That was a common thing. If you're familiar with LDS church history, in fact, the whole idea of the mobs that killed Joseph and Hiram in Carthage jail, those were local militias. They were gathered together. Every county was allowed to build their own militia, basically. And that was part of the reason that they needed to get Joseph and Hiram out of Nauvoo, because the area, the county where Nauvoo was reserved for Mormons, and so the Nauvoo Legion was there. The Nauvoo Legion was the Mormon militia in the Nauvoo area, and it was one of the more formidable militias in the whole area of the state. So no militia was willing to attack to try to get at Joseph Smith and Hiram by violence, because they'd never be successful. That's why they had to move them to Carthage to get them out of the control of the Nauvoo Legion, and then they're under their own militia control, which made it so much easier to murder them. This is frontier justice. This is how it worked back then. So it was common to have these things happen. If somebody slighted you, you get your neighbors and you go fight them. The whole idea of these warring families back and forth, we hear a lot from the southern United States time frame. That was common. It happened a lot. If you think that's what the whole Civil War was about, the nation split into two and hated each other and fought each other. That was the Civil War, which were only a few years before when the Mountain Meadows Massacre happened. So to take matters into your own hands was a common thing. Now let's think about 1857 and what's happening, okay? In 1856, we had a presidential election. President Buchanan was elected president in 1856. So he's a first-term president, just got into office. So he's trying to shake things up and do things for his own administration. In the Utah Territory at the time, Utah was not a state yet. That wasn't until much later, decades later, that Utah became an actual state. So Utah is a territory. It was governed by Brigham Young as the territorial governor. He was kind of appointed to that, sort of elected, but just more of like, you're the kind of leader, so we're just going to let you do it thing, because he was the leader of the Mormon church. It was the Mormons that settled the Utah area. and claimed it as their own. So they actually claimed it. Mormons claimed the Utah area as their own. Then the United States moved west and claimed them as a Utah territory after the Mexican-American War. Because technically the Utah territory was Mexican controlled until the end of that war, and then it was now American controlled territory. So when it became American controlled territory, federal authorities were sent from the administration out to Utah to basically help run the place and have a federal representation there to deal with laws and issues and challenges and those kinds of things. Well, those federal authorities weren't very favorable to Mormons, and so Brigham Young kicked them out. Every president is allowed to appoint their own federal authorities, and so when Buchanan gets in 56, he sends his people out to Utah to govern the place. While they're out here in Utah, they don't like the Mormons, and so they basically try to find reasons to convince the federal authorities, other federal authorities, to help break up the Mormon church and make life hard for them. So Brigham Young and the other saints basically say, "Look, you're out of here. You're not helping our situation. You're trying to hurt us. We don't want you in our territory." So they would usually get kicked out. So towards the beginning of 1857, Buchanan's appointed federal authorities were sent back to Washington. They go back to Washington and they say, the Mormons are terrible, horrible people. And I'm paraphrasing this, admittedly, that they're like, the Mormons are bad, and they're creating an army to uprise and come back and take out America. So that's what President Buchanan was told. Now, what President Buchanan did is a little interesting because he didn't say, well, let's send a group out to verify this. Let's see if I can establish a communication line with Brigham Young to understand what's going on here. He didn't do any of that. All he said was, that's not good. Under my administration, we need to teach them a lesson. So he sent the army to basically put down any uprising against America that the Mormons might be doing. So no notification. He didn't even tell Brigham Young and the Mormons that the army's moving. He appointed a general, and I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the general, but he appointed a general that had a very strong reputation for being extremely violent. This gentleman, even though he's a general, had nearly been court-martialed numerous times in his career in the military because he sometimes didn't treat people that disagreed with him politely. He was very violent, even with some of his own troops. He was kind of a take no prisoners type guy. So he's appointed to take these 2,500 army troops and go to Utah territory and deal with the Mormons. So they're all excited. They're going to go have a war and kill the Mormons and get rid of them, was some of the stories and rumors and ideas that were talked about in the camps as they moved over. Well, so there were a few Mormons who were back east that happened to see the supplies coming together, gathering up all these wagons and supplies to supply the army as they move across the plains and get over to the Utah territory. And they're like, what's going on? What's happening here? And they're like, oh yeah, there's an army. They're going to go out and kill the Mormons, basically, and get rid of Brigham Young and kick him out and destroy the Mormon uprising. And they're like, there's no Mormon uprising. That's not good. So they basically finish their business and get to Brigham Young before the army does. There was a gentleman that was favorable in the Senate that was favorable. He wasn't a Mormon, but he had advocated for Mormon rights in the judicial system a little bit for them. He sent a letter to Brigham Young and was like, dude, I don't know what's going on over there, but just so you know, here's what America is sending your way. So Brigham gets these letters and these reports from people going, President Buchanan has just sent one of the more violent generals with 2,500 troops to take you out. And he's like, holy crap, America is bad. America is terrible. They hate us. This is going to be another mob. Okay. And it's only been like 10 years since they've moved out west. And so there's still a little bit of memory of Joseph and being killed and the mobs attacking people and the violence that the Mormons faced back east before they came out west. So Brigham's mad. And he's like, look, I've been spending the 10 years that I've been out here trying to make the immigrant trains, these trails, safer and better for people. I'm trying to do America a favor and help them see that we are working to help America. Because what Brigham Young has been doing is his policy with the Indians was don't fight them, feed them, help them. So when immigrants are being attacked, Mormons can go out there and work with the Indians and go, look, let's settle this. Let's give you, some blankets or some food or some other things to deal with this, and let's not let these immigrants be destroyed. So Brigham has been working with the Indian chiefs and others to make it safer to have Western travel. When Brigham finds out this information that the United States is sending an army without warning to take him and the other church leaders and other groups out, he just decides, if America hates us, we're not going to do them any favors. So he sent a message to the Indian chiefs going, look, we're not going to stop you if you raid wagon trains. We're not stopping you anymore. The United States hates us. They're sending an army against us, which means they're going to try to recruit you guys either to fight us or they're going to destroy you too. So hopefully we can rally together, the Mormons and the Indians, to fight against this army that's coming. So the amount of attacks against immigrant wagon trains rose. There were 5 or 6 attacks in the Utah Territory in the year of 1857. Mountain Meadows Massacre was only one of those attacks. In fact, like 3 or 4 days before the Mountain Meadows one happened, so around September 3rd or 4th, there was actually there was almost a wagon train that was destroyed by the Indians up near Beaver, Utah. So this was one of the groups that was just before the immigrant wagon train that was killed at Mountain Meadows. And that was thankfully averted. They were able to avert that massacre and that problem from happening. Otherwise, the massacre would have happened in Beaver. It would have been the Beaver Mormon Meadows Massacre or something like that instead. But it wasn't. So the Mormons are in panic. Brigham Young issued an order of martial law in the territory of Utah at that time. So he told all the Mormon settlers up and down what we'd call today the Wasatch Front and all the way down in St. George and in southern Utah that we're at war with America. America's declared war on us. We didn't declare war on them. And we need to be prepared to last. So if they fight, we're in the Salt Lake area, they decided if they're going to attack us, we're not going to give them any victory. We're going to burn our city to the ground, and we're going to go hide up in the mountains. And when they come up the canyons to go after us, we're going to use the canyons as the high ground, if you're a Star Wars fan, and keep them at bay. And then just use this kind of guerrilla tactics to outlast the army until they can survive. Because they know a direct attack with the army and this Mormon Saints is not going to work. They would never survive that. It would be brutal. But if they hide in the mountains and attack anybody that comes to try to attack them, they could defend themselves and outlast the army for the most part. Not a best plan, but it's the best they had at the time, basically. So that's what they were going to do. So Brigham Young's order was to tell people, don't trade with the immigrant wagon trains. Save your supplies. Gather, in fact, buy supplies from the immigrant wagon trains. So we need bullets, we need guns, we need other supplies and food and things. So if they have excess, get it from them. And let's find a way to hide in the mountains and store our supplies and be ready to burn our cities to the ground. So they were planning for the worst with this army. Now, if you're familiar with LDS church history, you'll be thinking, what army is this? I don't remember an army like this. This is the army known as Johnston's army. Now, Johnston is not the general that was super violent and crazy. About halfway across the plains, the main general that was the violent one was reassigned to other troops to deal with other issues, and Johnston was brought in to take the army the rest of the way into Utah. So this is a horrible, crazy mess. So all Brigham Young knows, there's an army coming to stop an insurrection. That there is no insurrection, but they're going to come in and they're going to use violence against us, and this isn't going to go well. So we're at war with America, basically, is what Brigham Young's perspective was. So there's kind of this feeling of all these things that are happening. Okay, so Wagon trains are being raided at a little bit higher rate. There's more animosity and anger between the Mormon settlers and the non-Mormon immigrants, partially because of the martial law stuff that's going on for the Mormons to hoard everything. And there's always been a general animosity anyways against them, but it's more heightened during 1857. So Johnson's army never actually makes it until 1858 to Utah. Part of the reason is Brigham Young sent a group of people to the plains to basically delay everybody. So if you're familiar with Orrin Porter Rockwell and his story, he was sent out. They burned all the plains. They poisoned all the water holes. So it was just horrible conditions getting across the plains. They even burned Fort Bridger down. The Johnson's army thought they'd go stay the winter because they were so slow they couldn't make it through the winter. And winter conditions are brutal, like several feet of snow. So they decided we're just going to survive long enough to get to Fort Bridger, and then we'll last the winter at Fort Bridger, and then come spring we'll make it the rest of the way into Salt Lake Valley. Well, Orrin Rockwell and his buddies burned Fort Bridger to the ground, so Johnson's army had to live in the snow for the whole winter and endure those winters. So if you think of where Fort Bridger is, it's not they get a lot of snow. Let's put it that way, a lot of wind. So it was miserable conditions. So that's part of the challenge that's happening. Okay, these immigrant trains are happening all the time. Okay, this particular immigrant train that was killed at Mountain Meadows was primarily composed of people from Arkansas and Missouri. Now, Arkansas doesn't have a lot of direct connection in church history. There were saints from there. Missionaries went through Arkansas, and people would join the church and then travel to Missouri. Missouri has a clear connection to Mormon history because of Jackson County, Missouri, the people being kicked out. There's a lot of problems with that. Missouri is where the extermination order was given for saints with Governor Boggs. So all that was happening, basically. So Missourians aren't favorable by default in Utah among the Mormons. Arkansans weren't too bad. But in the early spring of 1857, an LDS apostle that was very well known named Parley P. Pratt was killed by a militia in Arkansas, near a place today of Alma, Arkansas. So that news was spreading at the same time in Utah. Hey, by the way, not only is there an army coming for us, but guess what? Parley P. Pratt was killed by a mob earlier this year in Arkansas. So now Arkansas people aren't very seen in a good light among Mormons. So hopefully we can start to see some of this animosity and challenges. I want to point out one thing about Brigham Young and his messages. If you read his speeches and his letters around this time with the martial law and other things, he does use what we would call today violent rhetoric in some of the letters and things he talks about. In his private speeches, his private discussions, he didn't talk that way. But in his public stuff, he kept a very strong persona of, I've got to be strong for the people. And so violent rhetoric was some of the things that were used. So I think all these conditions with violent rhetoric and other things is increasing the odds of something happening. It's not guaranteeing anything can happen, but it's increasing the odds. So also at this time, if we look at 1855, 56 timeframe, there were some unusual weather years that changed things for people. It was a little harder to get your harvests in because they had extra snow and extra challenges. So in 1856, they're little, they don't have as much food storage. They're still trying to save up, and now there's an army coming to attack them. So they're worried about that too. So the weather didn't make it easy for them to gather supplies. They're not as abundant as they used to be. So that's compounding it. Now, also at this time, because of the amount of immigration since 1849 that went into the gold rush in Southern California, or in all of California really, that is still happening. People are still going to California, not so much for the gold rush, but more for the settlements. So there were people in Arkansas that had gone in previous years to California and said, "We love it here. It is awesome. It's amazing. The rest of our family should come west and settle." Because there was a big abundance of people moving into California, the economy was growing, things were starting to really happen and do more in California. The prices for beef went up. So the farmers in Arkansas who were raising cattle for beef saw a huge opportunity. If we can move our herds to California, we can sell off our beef and make a pretty good living and then live in California instead of Arkansas. Move out there and build some homes and live in California. So this immigrant train that was part of this train that came through Utah, that came in earlier in the summer to Salt Lake City, they had 600 head of cattle. If you've never seen a herd of cattle, 600 head is a pretty big herd of cattle. Usually today you see 30 or 40 heads of cattle together, but 600 is huge. So the challenge is there's other herds coming through from other immigrant trains, and then this extra big train comes in. And so they stayed a little bit further west outside of the city of Salt Lake, so they weren't interfering as much because 600 head of cattle is going to eat a lot of grassland. That's going to limit the amount of grassland for the Mormon pioneers as well, for their cattle. So it was kind of, they tried not to make a mess. But it's hard to miss a wagon train with 600 head of cattle on it either. Now, wagon trains, let's talk about them for just a second here. Wagon trains themselves are very permeable. When a wagon train sets out, it's usually several families that get together and say, we're going to band together because there's safety in numbers and go across the plains on this huge journey, and we hope we survive it. Sometimes you wouldn't survive it at all. If you've ever played the Oregon Trail, you know what I'm talking about, how hard that condition can be. So they band together. But here's the thing, not everybody's traveling to the same destination. So wagon trains would come together to work together for the distance that they were mutually traveling in. Sometimes that would be go from the east to Salt Lake City, and then the ones that want to go north would split off. The ones that went south would split off that direction. So who was in a wagon train would change from week to week, depending upon the needs of the people. Maybe you had a family member, your family got sick. The rest of the wagon train wouldn't wait for you, so you got stuck and had to survive until another wagon train came along that you could tag into to keep your journeys going. So that sometimes happens. Sometimes families would break off from wagon trains. Sometimes other families would join a wagon train later. So groups would move in and out of these wagon trains. It was never the same group all the way across the plains. Some families would leave, some families would join as they went across. Other families, basically. Also at these wagon trains there was a group of men, single men, that were kind of seen as ruffians. They would travel with wagon trains. Sometimes they would just spend their life going up and down the wagon trains, being a guide for some wagon trains, being hired guns to protect wagon trains, and some of them were just there to cause mischief and be jerks, unfortunately. So the wagon trains sometimes would capture these people would tag along with them that had been back and forth a few times, but were just looking for a quick buck to go get drunk in the local saloon, basically. So there was these kind of ruffian groups that would these men that would come individually in and out of wagon trains as well. So this particular wagon train from Arkansas, they came over, they joined with some people from Missouri. Some people split off and went north or stayed. There was a family, I think, that stayed in Salt Lake City a little bit longer before picking up another wagon train to head south with. When they hit Salt Lake, some of the wagon train dispersed. Some stayed together as they went south. There were a couple of these straggler men that jumped in there as well that weren't the nicest to the Mormons either. And so that's part of this permeability and challenge that's happening with the wagon trains, okay? So hopefully you can start to see there's a lot of larger things that are influencing perspectives in the Utah Territory in 1857. There's even weather things that are affecting how people are thinking about their resources and who do I trade with and don't trade with because of some of the scarcity they've had in the past. There's a threat of war coming. There was a rumor that the army was splitting into two. The main army would go into Salt Lake City. The other army would take a southerly route to St. George and then come north and combine with the bigger army up top and just hit the Mormons from two sides and then collapse in on them. There were some crazy rumors. And of course, all you have is people riding a horse with a letter in their hand to get communication back and forth. So it was easy for rumors to be spread without being verified. So this is what 1857 was like. Party P. Pratt was killed. There's tensions are really high in 1857. So let's talk about the specifics around this wagon train a little bit more. This wagon train's heading south along what we would call today the I-15 corridor, not staying where I-15 is now, but staying probably further west in the more flatlands areas because of their cattle to come down south. Again, they're on their way to Southern California to sell their cattle. So they're coming down. And there's other wagon trains ahead of them. Like I'd mentioned, there was another wagon train that was a few days ahead of the Mountain Meadows one, and this one almost at Beaver was destroyed by Indians, and then the Mormon pioneers got in there and was able to stop the violence and basically prevent it from happening. So there was a major massacre that almost happened before the Mountain Meadows one, but it was stopped by Mormons who were level-headed and were able to convince the Indians not to go through with their plans. So that happened, and then the Mountain Meadows one comes right past that, right through that area. So that wagon train in Beaver, the Arkansas one was up further north towards. I'm assuming they're probably closer to what we'd call Nephi today. Payson, Santaquin, Nephi, Mona area. So there's a few days between them, and they just move south. So by the time the Arkansas train got down there, the other train had already moved on. So they came down through Beaver, then they went down to Mountain Meadows, and they're like, where do we settle? They settled out in Mountain Meadows to prepare for that trip across the desert. So they've got to be able to have supplies and water for them and their animals to last through that. You just got to survive the desert and hope you make it, is kind of what they would do back then. On this journey south through Utah territory, the rumors are, and unfortunately we can't corroborate this because all the immigrants are dead, the rumors that were around at the time was that this wagon train was rude, very rude to the Mormons. Whether the wagon train was rude or not in actuality is something that cannot be verified or corroborated. We can't prove whether they really were jerks to the Mormons or not, mainly because we don't have the diaries and journals of the people. We don't have them because they all got killed at the massacre. So we're kind of limited on advice there, or information there. But the rumors were that as this wagon train traveled south, they were really frustrated with the Mormons because the Mormons wouldn't trade with them. And when they did trade with them, like they had wheat, but they didn't have flour. To go from wheat grain to flour, you need a mill that will grind the wheat to make it flour. So they need to find somebody, a Mormon settlement, that will grind their flour for them. Well, because of Brigham Young's order, they shouldn't be helping these people out but instead of saving up their own supplies for them. So they finally found a guy that said, okay, I'll help you grind your flour, but I'm going to charge you basically 3 times what would be the normal rate because we're trying to gather supplies and hoard stuff for ourselves. So these people are like, that's not cool, but it's kind of our only option, so we'll pay you the price. So the immigrants are mad at the Mormons for being jerks to them. The Mormons claim that these immigrants were telling them, hey, we're glad Joseph and Hiram were killed. You Mormons are idiots and terrible people. In fact, some of the people in our wagon train were part of the mob that killed Joseph and Hiram. There was one claim that one of the guns that a person in this wagon train had with them was a gun that put a bullet into Joseph Smith. And so if you want to make Mormons mad, especially in the 1850s, just tell them you helped kill Joseph and Hiram. That's all it would take. So that's the claim, that these immigrants were spreading these baloney lies and being rude to the Mormons. The Mormons were obviously not willing to work with and corroborate with these people very much either. So you can see where this idea of this road rage concept starting to form. We think of road rage today, somebody does something that spites me, I'm going to get back on them because I need my pride to be saved, and that's where road rage happens. We're not doing it because they did anything necessarily, usually road rage happens because I feel like my pride has been hurt by the person in the other car, and so I'm going to exact revenge against them in some way to justify the anger that I feel inside myself. That's usually where road rage comes from. So we can hopefully you can start to see this. This is what's happening in the pioneer era in 1857. This idea of road rage is these same concepts, these ideas of spiting each other's pride and needing to get revenge against each other is increasing the tension in the area, basically. So that's part of it. Now, again, whether that happened or not, we don't know. I think what happened most likely is the main settlers or the main immigrants were obviously unhappy with the Mormon settlers because they weren't willing to work with them. There's probably some anger and resentment between them there. I think what most of the negative rhetoric came from the wagon train are those single men that were the stragglers coming in and out of camps. I'm sure they were the ones that were saying the worst negativity against Mormons. But because they were part of a wagon train, the whole wagon train got basically the whole wagon train was blamed for the rhetoric, even though it was only one or two people that were the idiots that were portraying that rhetoric out there. So that's where some of the excuse comes from to justify the Mormons faking Indian raid against them. The other thing that happened that can be corroborated is one of the cattle from this wagon train fell sick. And so they basically left this animal out of their herd. They moved on, left the animal. They knew eventually, Indians would come by and collect the animal and take whatever meat they could salvage off of it. They didn't want to. They had this animal was sick and died, and they just wanted to keep moving on. That's just the loss of kind of a business loss, basically, as you're going along and doing the cattle ranch business. Well, the challenge is there was a couple of Indians that were carving up this cow. And a couple of them, they all got sick, really, really sick. And one or two of them died from the sickness from this cow. So the Indians are now a little mad at this immigrant train because they're now going, we tried to salvage one of your dead animals and now our people are dead because they got sick from your dead animal. We're going to blame you for that. And so the Indians had a little bit of animosity building up for them against these people as well. The rumors that were spread about this situation was, and this was part of, again, utilized as that justification, was that it was the immigrants who poisoned the cow and purposely killed the Indians. And that was the rumor that was spread for 2 decades, claiming why it was justified to go after these immigrants. Most likely that's not what happened. Now, some forensic scientists have investigated this claim, the sickness that these people got, and what they think happened was anthrax. Anthrax was common among cattle in the 1850s. And when you're coming west, you're spreading the anthrax with you. So anthrax are little spores that can stay in dry, arid climates. They can stay spores and not get out, but when they get moisture and wetness, they can last for like decades, and then they'll eventually pop open and wreak havoc. There was an uptick in anthrax problems among immigrant trains in the 1850s and 1860s. The symptoms that the Indians described these Indians were getting are corresponding with symptoms of anthrax. So a lot of scientists today who've looked into this say it was probably anthrax, There was some anthrax among the cattle. This one cattle happened to get really sick with it, and it's activated. And then the Indians came in and didn't realize, they didn't understand the idea of germ theory and stuff. They got sick with the anthrax, and it killed it. It killed one or two of them. A couple of them survived and recovered after a horrible sickness. So that's all. This is just upping the ante for anger and hatred to happen. So by the time this immigrant wagon train makes it down to Cedar City area, there's some anger, there's some resentment because of the cow that killed, poisoned some Indians. There was rumors and claims that these immigrants, were coming into town going, hey, we need some supplies. Can we get some eggs from you? And somebody's like, no, I don't sell you eggs. So they just shoot their chickens and walk away, spiteful things, which I could see from those men that were straggler men in the wagon train. I could see that possible from them more than the families. So all this is what's happening. Okay, there's anger, there's hatred, there's resentment that's building among these people. There's animosity because of the coming war with Johnson's army. There's all these little factors that are going on. So by the time this wagon train makes it to Cedar City, some of the people were going to the stake president, Isaac Haight, who lived in Parowan, and were saying, this is a terrible wagon train. These guys are a bunch of jerks to us. Whether they were or not, we cannot corroborate that because it's all hearsay. It's all, I heard this person said that they said this kind of stuff. Whether it was only a couple people in the wagon train or the whole wagon train, again, that's a whole other story. There's not enough details or anything that can be corroborated to prove that. For or against, honestly. All we can say is these were the things that were used to justify the massacre with. That's all we can say at this point. There's lack of evidence, basically. So Isaac Haight decides we need to do something about this. I think it's okay let's fake a cattle raid. Let's get the Indians wrestled in this. The problem that Isaac Haight had was while he is the stake president, which is a religious leader in the local area, Bishop Klingensmith was the bishop in Cedar City. They're ecclesiastical leaders. They also held positions within the Utah militia at the time, but there was somebody who was a commander over them. That was William Dame. William Dame also lived in the area, and he was the one that commanded the forces for southern Utah, the Utah militia, or what they called kind of Zion's Camp 2, if you will. So they had to get permission to use the militia from William Dame to get the men to do this. So they went to him and said, hey, here's our plan. We're going to get a bunch of Indians to go after them and kind of stage this Indian attack. But we want the militia men to kind of be there to support the Indians and help out. So William Dame's like, oh, okay. I don't know if I like this plan, but okay. This was not an uncommon thing to happen. Again, Indian raids happen all the time on immigrant trains. These people are a bunch of jerks, so we feel justified in hating against them. And so that's what they did. And so they called John D. Lee up. He was a Mormon settler, lived in New Harmony, if I remember right. And they called him up. He was a captain in the militia. And he said, get a few men rallied together, go talk to the Indians, get them riled up, and help them stage this attack to kind of spite this group. And so he went and did it. But the Indians said, we're not going to do it unless you guys literally help us do this. And so John D. Lee said, okay, fine. The only way this is going to work is if some of us white men join the Indians in the raid. So that's how it got started. That's the conditions. That's what's going on. In our day and age, this sounds like totally crazy. In their day and age, this isn't crazy. Okay? To them, this is just road rage. The same way as we see today where someone gets mad and they make somebody else pull over and they get in a big fight on the side of the road. We see that as you're just being idiots, but it happens often enough that we don't think much about it. That's the equivalent of what happened with this cattle raid attempt that they were trying to do down there. They were just trying to spite these people. The problem was the plan didn't work. It was a miserable failure. So here's the issue they had, okay? Their faked cattle raid failed. The immigrants know white men, white Mormon settlers are helping the Indians to ruin this, to attack and kill this wagon train and take all their stuff from them. So from a Mormon standpoint, for these Mormon settler standpoint, you have to realize there's an army coming from the U.S. to kill us right now. They're on their way. This group, if we let them go, they're going to go through the desert during the winter, which means they're going to make it there by spring, easily during the winter, and then they're going to send another army back to attack us. So we're going to have an army from California come in to hit southern Utah, an army from the United States hit up in Salt Lake City. It's going to be doubly worse, and we're going to be destroyed, and our families are going to be killed, our crops and homes are going to be obliterated and destroyed, our whole livelihood and religion is going to go away because of this botched attempt that's going to exacerbate the already negative problems and issues that are happening in the area anyways. So they looked at this and said, we can't be held responsible for this. We have to hide the evidence. We have to get rid of this. So when John D. Lee went back to Isaac Haight and said, okay, the plan was botched, it didn't work, Isaac Haight's like, oh crap, we're stuck with this. He's a church leader, so he has a bit more complicity in this. So he's going to have a lot come down on him, probably lose his calling as a stake president, maybe even lose his membership in the church because he was involved in this raid. So he has to cover his tracks. He's got to hide the evidence. We can't be found guilty. But he has to get William Dame to authorize the militia to kill the immigrants. So John D. Lee and William Dame go, or John D. Lee and Isaac Haight and others go to William Dame. They actually invite William Dame down to Isaac Haight's house. They have a meeting. And in this meeting, these men are gathering to debate and discuss, what do we do? William Dame in this meeting said, I think we need to just let them go and suffer the consequences of our stupid plan. That's what we should do. So the meeting ended with that as what William Dame wanted to do. As everybody left, Isaac Haight and one other person, I forgot the other gentleman's name, they grabbed William Dame, they took him out back in a little secret meeting next to a pile of wood, which is why this was called, if I remember right, like the Woodpile Committee or Woodpile Meeting or whatever. They basically laid it on thick with William Dame going, dude, you're going to lose your command. You might even lose your membership in the church over this. Your life will be destroyed because you are complicit with us. If we're going down, you're going down. And that's why we need to get rid of these people. And so William Dame in the secret meeting said, okay, fine, use the militia and kill the rest of the immigrants. Now, what William Dame was told, as best as we can find out, was that there was only a few immigrants left. The Indians had slaughtered most of the immigrants. There was just a couple left. That was it. We just need to kind of clean it up a little bit and we'll be fine. What he did not know was there was only a couple dead. 120 out of 120 immigrants were still alive. Most of the wagon train was still intact. He didn't get told that part. They juiced up the information between John D. Lee and Isaac Haight to convince William Dame to give them the authorization to do this. So John D. Lee puts this plan in place. So we talked about in the previous video of how they went through and got the settlers to come out, and then they murdered everybody and did all this. So that's why all this happened, okay? I hope you can see there were lots of big issues, nationwide issues going on that raised the temperature of animosity. There were local issues that were going on that raised the temperature of animosity. There were people making very poor decisions that caused this to happen. Now, one thing I want to talk about here is what was Brigham Young's involvement in this. This is one of the biggest reasons that Mountain Meadows Massacre is still talked about today, is because it's used as a blunt force object to hit against the church, specifically Brigham Young. And a lot of the investigations we're going to talk about next week that happened to what happened in the aftermath is they were trying to find a way to pin it to Brigham Young. So let's bring this up and kind of settle the issues with this, okay? Brigham Young is dealing with Johnson's army coming, dealing with federal authorities that they kicked out. They're trying to reestablish things and deal with stuff. He's getting communication from the interim governor, Governor Cummings, that's coming over with Johnson's army. He's getting, he's trying to find a way to not have a war that obliterates the Mormons. He's also trying to deal with the wagon train issues that are happening, they wanted to do because it was 1847 was when the pioneers came into the Utah area. And so 1857 is the 10-year anniversary. They were going to put a big party on to celebrate the 10 years of being in Utah, in the Utah Territory, or Deseret is what Brigham Young wanted to call it. So they were planning that, and then that all fell apart when they heard Johnson's army's coming and all this other stuff. So Brigham's dealing with all of these things going on. What happened with Brigham Young was he did not know what was going on in St. George. He didn't know the massacre was happening. He didn't hear all the rumors and the challenges and stuff till way later, way later, till after it was all said and done. What they did, though, was because William Dame and others were like, we should not attack these people, there was somebody that made the suggestion, why don't we see what Brigham Young said? And they said, that's a good idea. So at that meeting I talked about at Isaac Haight's house, where they got all those people together and then had the woodpile meeting afterwards. From that meeting, they said they wrote a letter to Brigham Young. They gave it to a gentleman, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they gave it to this gentleman, and they said, ride as fast as you can back up to Salt Lake City. Now, from the Parowan, Cedar City area to Salt Lake City back then, under normal conditions, would take nearly a week to travel one way, and then a week to come back. This gentleman, because he's riding full out, just going on his horse as far as he can, he'd ride a while till his horse was too tired, get out, find somebody he could borrow a horse from, ride till he could, he'd had to change 2 or 3 times as he's going. It took him 2 days. He got up to Salt Lake City in 2 days. Minimal sleep. I think he only slept like 2 hours the whole 2-day trip. He's riding all out the whole way there as best he can. There's no freeways, no roads. I mean, when he's riding all out, we're talking like 25 miles an hour is as fast as he's making it over these hills and dells and valleys and stuff to get up to Salt Lake. He gets to Salt Lake. Brigham says, go take a nap for an hour, reads the letter, decides what they're going to do. Brigham Young writes a letter and gives it to him to go back. Brigham Young's letter to go back was, leave the people alone. Give them the supplies they need. If they attack you, defend yourself. But do not attack these people, basically. That's what his message was to him. And we see that in dealing with other wagon train issues and other things that Brigham Young was dealing with. That was what he was telling people to do at that time. That's the letter he sent down. So the guy gets back on another horse, heads south, goes through a couple of change of horses. So it took him 2 days to get back down. By the time he gets back down, he makes it on September 12th, morning of September 12th, to Isaac Haight's house. Goes in, gives a letter to Isaac Haight. Isaac Haight reads it. Okay, he's just gotten the notification that on the night of September 11th, he was told, a couple guys rode into town after the massacre and said, it's done. They're all killed except for 17 children. The next morning, he gets this rider in from Brigham Young with this letter that Brigham Young says, leave the people alone, give them their supplies, and let them go. According to the people that were there, the story is that Isaac Hayes started to cry and fell on his knees weeping and saying, it's too late, it's too late, it's too late. The people are already dead. It was just late enough that they'd already massacred them and taken care of this. So on September 12th, William Dame and Isaac Haight, who were the leaders that authorized the plan to happen, they went finally out to Mountain Meadows to see the results of the massacre. They were not out there during the massacre. They went out the next day and witnessed what happened. And that's when they realized this was way worse than they thought. This is not what they thought it was going to be. This was way worse. So we have the letter from Brigham Young that is Brigham Young saying, do not attack the people, don't, and they weren't trying to imply anything to him, but they were like, he's like, don't attack them. If they attack you, defend, but let them go on their way. He did not know there had been any attack or any fake attack, like a fake. They didn't tell Brigham Young that there was a faked, failed cattle rustle against him. They didn't tell him that part. They said the Indians are having problems with these people. What do we do? And that's what his advice was. So we have those letters. We can show that in writing, Brigham Young was not condoning this ever to happen. Now, some people say, well, yeah, you can say those letters, but that was just Brigham Young's cover. He was secretly involved in the planning of this. So let's talk about Isaac and William's response to the Mountain Meadows. When they went out there that Saturday, September 12th, 1857, to investigate what was the result of their plan, and they saw how bad it was, Isaac Haight and William Dame spent the rest of the day, while they're trying to bury bodies, they spent the rest of the day arguing over which one of them is responsible for the murders of these people. Now that's significant, because if Brigham Young is where they got their orders from to do this, then why are they trying to blame each other for it? They would easily just go, I don't know how Brigham Young is going to get out of this one. This was horrible. But that's not what they said. They were blaming each other for this. They didn't bring Brigham Young into it at all. So there's more credibility. Brigham Young didn't even have any part of the planning and didn't know about this. Now, the last part of the credibility comes on John D. Lee. John D. Lee was the captain in the militia, Utah militia for Southern Utah, that was the main ringleader to pull all the plans together and execute the plans and do all this. He is also the only person who was charged and convicted of the crimes relating to the Mountain Meadows Massacre. He's the only one that was executed from this. All the rest didn't see any justice against them. And we're going to talk about that in the next video, to go into why and what happened and how that worked out. So John D. Lee was told numerous times, there was over a dozen attempts to get John D. Lee in his testimony to basically pin it back on Brigham Young. They told him, if you can give us information, if you can claim that Brigham Young is responsible for this, we will let you go. We'll drop all charges against you and let you go. And John D. Lee said, no, I am not going to sentence an innocent man for what happened. Even when they were executing John D. Lee, he gave a 5-minute speech right before they pulled the trigger and executed him. During that speech, he did decry, he thought Brigham Young had led the saints astray in their doctrinal teachings, because Brigham Young had a different administration than Joseph Smith, but he never once said Brigham Young is guilty of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Brigham Young is the author of this massacre. There is no evidence to prove Brigham Young had anything to do with the Mountain Meadows Massacre. There's lots of evidence that shows that Isaac Haight and William Dame and John D. Lee and others did have a hand in this. So I want to put that to bed. There's no evidence anywhere that Brigham Young was ever involved or ever knew this. In fact, it took about 2 years before Brigham Young even started to understand the truth of what really happened in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And we're going to talk more about that in the next video as to what was the aftermath. Why did it take almost 22 years to convict John D. Lee? Why wasn't anybody else convicted of this crime, even though there was more than a dozen that were involved in this crime? And what happened to the 17 children that were spared while their siblings and parents were murdered? What happened to them, and how did this was there any closure? Was there any issues with that? How did this wrap up? So we'll talk about that in the next video as we continue to understand Mountain Meadows Massacre. Thanks for watching.